25 years ago, then senior diplomat and writer Pavan Varma wrote a book called The Great Indian Middle Class, which drew a lot of attention for pointing out, among other things, that the Indian middle class was in need of an ethical renaissance. While praising its many strengths, Verma also offered a sharp critique about its insularity at the cost of those hundreds of millions of Indians lower in the social pecking order. The book pointed out how increasingly insensitive the middle class had become towards the underprivileged. The book also focused on the consequences of India's fundamental economic liberalization and globalization, which began in 1991, and how material well being started consuming the Indian middle class. A quarter century later, and over 3 decades after the economic reform, Mayank Chhaya Reports asked Pavan Verma, now a politician and a high profile cultural observer with several celebrated books to his name, how the middle class has evolved, particularly in terms of its political and ideological preferences. Pavan Verma.
25 years ago, your book, The Great Indian Middle Class, was a sharp critic of the middle class. And your main grievance was that it often displayed sort of moral bankruptcy. And your broad point, if I remember it right, was that it needed sort of an ethical renaissance. Do you think that renaissance has happened and your critique may have changed now in the last 25 years?
Firstly, thank you, Mayank, for this opportunity to talk to you. It's a great pleasure always. Uh, I wrote The Great Indian Middle Class, but it was not entirely a critique. It also expressed unreserved praise for the resilience, the entrepreneurship, the optimism, and the aspirations of the Indian middle class, which often drive an economy. At the same time, I critiqued the middle class's relative insularity and its social insensitivity to the far larger numbers below it and their visibly miserable plight. And I said that unless the relatively educated or again the relatively well off show a little more empathy and concern and actually mobilize action for the poor and the deprived, or at least begin to notice them, uh, that sense of solidarity the middle class lacked. So I think that as far as what changes have occurred, the middle class has a vibrant, a growing, but not, I would say, vibrant, a growing civil society consciousness today. You may have found, for instance, in the Jessica Lal case, the famous murder, the middle class mobilized itself to ensure justice. Uh, Post the Nirbhaya horrific rape incident, the middle class was exceptionally active in expressing outrage. Often, the middle class, even now, when it seems to have acquired a greater degree of uh, awareness to issues outside its immediate ken of individual interest, it reacts more vigorously when members of its own class, with whom they can identify, face injustice or oppression or any form of violence. But I would still maintain that, in general, to the vast numbers of the poor in our country, because I think India, in spite of being one of the fastest growing economies in the world, of which I am proud, still has the largest number of the abjectly poor in the world, the largest number of people who can't read or write, the largest number of malnutrition children. So I think the middle class's need for a little more activism, not only in its own interest, because I don't blame it for that. Everybody works for their own interest, but a little more activism in terms of the fact that the successful cannot secede to form
Right.
their own republic. It's a phrase I use in the great Indian middle class.
I
We
remember that.
have to
Yeah.
grow together or we will sing together. So that is my assessment of the current Indian middle class in terms of your question.
Right. In 1998, around that time when your book came out, India was about 6 to 7 years into its liberalization and globalization of its economy. And I think the middle class had just begun to discover the benefits of what it means to have an open economy. It's been now 25 years since that time. There have been remarkable changes in the economic structure. What do you think has been the most defining aspect of the change for the middle class? You mentioned that it still remains insular when it comes to the concerns or the problems of the people at the lower pecking orders of the society in terms of oppression and poverty and things like that. So tell me what you think is the defining change since the opening up of the
Well,
Indian economy.
that defining change began to be visible when I wrote the book in 1998, but was post the 1991 economic reforms initiated by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. The economy grew at unprecedentedly high rates for almost a decade. And I've always believed that when the economy grows at higher rates, more people are redeemed from below the poverty line than decades of socialism where you try to redistribute wealth. I'm speaking specifically of a country like India. And so the numbers of the middle class swelled as those who were below the poverty line or on the fringe of the poverty line, as a result of the growth in the economy, joined the lower rungs of the middle class. That was one defining change. Secondly, I think aspirationally, and let me assure you that the first few years after our independence in 1947, when the general ethos of the middle class was to shun ostentatious wealth, to not hanker too much after material goods. It was, I think, a hangover of the legacy of the freedom movement and Mahatma Gandhi and the emphasis on the poverty in India. The middle class largely focused on education of their children, on value systems in the home, and so on and so forth. But after 1998, after I wrote my book, the middle class became far more aspirational in consumer terms. And the plastic card came its way,
Right.
where both its incomes rose and its ability to spend on credit, which they would settle later, grew. At the same time, in an earlier very restricted market, the canvas of
Yeah.
goods that could be bought in India. You won't remember Mayank maybe, but there were days when people would go abroad, they would bring back shampoo and
I
and, and
I
you
do
know
remember.
and cheese and some things like that. I mean, India offered far more to buy. It offered far more accessible avenues to acquire. Incomes were rising, so people were willing to take that risk. And so, in a sense, the middle class's obsession or pursuit of material uh, satiation
Right.
grew rather than lessened.
I would come to the broader question of the shift towards the Hindu right that has happened over the last 25 years, especially since 2013-14. But before that, I want to understand from you what you think is the difference between the zeitgeist of the middle class in the 1990s when you wrote the book and what it is now since 2014.
Uh, you mean, can you just repeat the last part of your question, Mayank? I didn't get it.
Okay. No, I'm saying, how do you think the zeitgeist of the middle class has changed from the 1990s when you wrote the book to now, especially since 2014?
Well, I have tried to reflect some of it in my latest book called The Great Hindu Civilization, where the coming of the BJP and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014 gave to the middle class the avenue, the platform, and the opportunity to voice some of its angst, which it believed had been inimical or biased against the overwhelming majority of India, which are Hindus. And there was a reason for that, which I explained. Uh, Even before 1947 and independence, some of the then middle class were against, for instance, Mahatma Gandhi's support of the pan Islamist Khilafat movement. In fact, there were people of great importance within the Congress party who also opposed it. Post 1947, there were sections in the middle class which felt that the Congress party, and in particular Mahatma Gandhi, was far too accommodating of the Muslims. I'm not saying it's a right assessment. I'm saying
Right.
some of it today is, we are seeing a backlash, and quite a bit of it is coming from the middle class. Then there were a series of events which the middle class internalized. They didn't become anti Gandhi or anti Congress, but these were building up. Post independence, when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru advised Dr. Rajendra Prasad against going for the inauguration of the rebuilt Somnath Mandir, which houses one
Right.
of the 12 sacred Jyotirlings, which had been vandalized many times by uh, Islamic invaders. The middle class uh, acquiesced, but I think there was some degree of resentment. Then, when the Hindu personal law was the only law that was changed, and other personal laws were kept as they were, including certain practices which have now recently been banned, like triple talaq in
Right.
Islam, which were patently anti women. Uh, the resentment built up further. Then there was the issue of uh, Hindu temples not being in the control of the community, whereas the religious sites of other communities were in their control. Then there came the question in the mid 80s of the manner in which the then government of Rajiv Gandhi overruled, in my view, a patently sensible judgment of the Supreme Court on the Shah Bano case.
Right.
And people felt that this was an appeasement of the minority because the ruling political party or parties were looking on it as a electoral vote bank, often at the uh, cost of what is either the national good or what is not done as much for Hindus. I'm talking of perceptions, if you're understanding what I'm
I
saying.
understand completely, completely.
And then there was the movement for the building of the Ram Ayodhya Mandir, and I think there, even though they may not have been part of the Karsevaks, the middle class, a large part of it was metaphorically and mentally carrying the bricks
Right.
uh, for the building of a new temple. So all of this was building up. All of this was building up. And in 1992, when I wrote my book, I did say that the middle class has become uh, fairly communalized. By that, I don't mean that they are necessarily Hindu extremists in any way possible, but that they had an empathy for some of what they thought was the rectification of history. Another middle
Right.
class angst, by the way, was the narrative of history, whereby uh, the Turkic invasion of India by leftist historians, some of which I've critiqued myself, be it Irfan Habib or Ramila Thapar uh, or others, sought to downplay the level of destruction and pillage and damage to Hinduism, Hindu artifacts, culture, and civilization. Uh, and this attempt almost as though the invaders came in a bus and sort of offered biryani to the populace they conquered, and they were given puri aloo in return, and a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, which we value greatly. I really believe it's important. But that suddenly evolved. It didn't happen like that. I mean, Will Durant has said that the Turkic invasion was one of the bloodiest chapters in world history, and it has been documented, and it's a fact, and I speak about that myself in my book. So all of this had sort of come together, and the coming of the BJP and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a sense, gave the middle class an avenue for some of its otherwise suppressed resentments
Right.
to find a voice. But let me warn you about one thing, unless you want to ask another
No,
question.
no, no. Sure. Go ahead. Finish that thought.
I see the middle class in India has become a pan Indian class. It is not merely today a regional class in a much greater way than it was even in 1998. Someone educated in, let us say, Patna gets admission in a vocational college or engineering college in Pondicherry.
Right.
And this kind of movement for job mobility, employment opportunity, uh, has gradually converted the salad bowl of India into a melting pot. And the one common factor in that pot is a pan Indian middle class, bound by a similar ecosystem, value system, aspirational system, a sartorial system, communication system, and so on and so forth. Now,
Right.
this class is not a jihadi class. It's an aspirational class. There are fringe elements on both sides of all religious spectrum. But the middle class in India was perhaps the bulk of it not unhappy if there was a rectification of history,
Right.
as it seems to have been distorted in the past.
Right.
But it did not want, or it does not want, I maintain, a communalized cauldron which leads to endemic instability, because the middle class's future depends on economic growth and opportunities. And both of these are threatened by the endemic instability that social disharmony brings.
Right.
So, the middle class, if I can sum it up, was supportive of some of the ideological planks on which the BJP came to power and consolidated it in 2019. But the middle class is beginning to see that in some ways this constant religious strife is also a means to permanently deflect attention from some of the real issues which are of concern to the middle class: jobs, inflation, shrinking incomes. Don't forget, Mayank, that the middle class has got used to a certain continuous growth in the standard of living. And when that is certain, old habits die hard, but debts increase. Incomes shrink, but expenditure doesn't immediately. And post COVID, as many uh, sources will inform you, the size of the Indian middle class actually shrunk for the first time
Right.
as people got pushed from the lower rungs of the middle class into poverty again. So it's a mixed picture where
Right.
the middle class will ultimately vote for perhaps a stringent, uh, let us say, pro BJP stance, provided there is parallelly economic growth that keeps it happy. But when that disfunk happens, the middle class says, look, between the two, let's have economic growth, development, peace, harmony, progress, rather than this permanent sense of insecurity and instability.
Right. Would you say that the rise of the Hindu right is directly proportional to the rise of the Indian middle class? And I ask this bearing in mind that even in 2019, the general elections of 2019, the BJP's vote share was about 37 odd percent. And out of 600 odd million people that voted, which is about 225 million people or so. So if you look at it in a country of 1.3 billion people at that point, 225 million people created a government which has fundamentally altered the narratives across the country. So my point is that small segment of the middle class has managed to change the narratives completely. Would you agree?
I won't, because the reasons for the BJP's success certainly do not depend beyond a small percentage to how the middle class votes. The real issue is that this country at the moment does not have a viable opposition, which essentially means a face, a narrative, a pan Indian organizational network, or even a party which is strong enough to take on the BJP in perhaps the form like the UPA could. The NDA has, has a fulcrum, it's called the BJP. The UPA had a fulcrum, it was the Congress, the only other party with a national footprint. That fulcrum has shrunk or is not acceptable to many. And the Congress cannot cede space to parties which are stronger than it in states to forge that opposition unity, because that will hit the Congress base itself. I say this for a very simple reason. If it were to cede space to parties in states which are stronger than the Congress and therefore back them alone, it would be reduced to fighting for itself in only 10 or 11 states. And in these states, its principal opponent is the BJP. And the BJP strike rate in 2019 against the Congress was 96%. So the Congress will literally get decimated. So I am saying that there are complex reasons,
Okay.
including the fact that BJP has a leader whose sheen may not be the same as it was in 2019, who is becoming perhaps predictable, uh, against whom there are larger resentments and some very legitimate discontents, including joblessness and a more authoritarian state which is inimical to individual liberty, price rise, etc. But they have a leader, they have a narrative. Hindutva, hypernationalism, and welfarism. Labharthi. Welfarism, I mean that they have genuinely succeeded in using DBT, direct benefit transfer, through Jandhan, through internet and mobile
Right.
to targeted beneficiaries. Good social engineering, narrow actual support base of forward caste, therefore co-option of the OBCs, and above all, a very strong organizational network, which is a 24 into 7 machine where the RSS cadre is also involved. So, as against this, the BJP wins by 37% only, absolute majorities, because none of the opposition parties strong in their own regions have the ability to go beyond their individual silos, and they continue to divide each other's vote,
Right.
which always benefits the BJP. Now, the middle class perhaps is not the middle class of 1977 or of 1989. When in 77, for very strong reasons, they dumped Mrs. Indira Gandhi post emergency. In 1989, they opted for a Khichdi government, a coalition government. Now,
Right.
in terms of stability, the middle class, when it comes to parliamentary elections, in the absence of a viable alternative which is cohesive on a pan India scale, the same members of the middle class who vote in an opposition party in assembly elections vote for the BJP or Prime Minister Narendra Modi in parliamentary elections because they believe that that is the only entity which can form a stable government at the center. So these are factors which
Right.
currently account for the BJP's success over and above the middle class's proclivities.
Okay. Many Indian economists define the middle class as consumers who can spend between $2 and $10 per capita per day. If that is the standard, the calculation is that about half of India's population would be roughly called middle class. That's a massive number, 700 million people, uh, which is interestingly the third largest country on the planet, if just the middle class alone. How do you see this gigantic mass impacting India socio-culturally in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, part of it I've answered, but let me elaborate a little. You see, what a middle class is by Western standards is not applicable to it. If you take some of their parameters which are essential for somebody to qualify for the middle class. In India, the ecosystem of the middle class begins at the level where anyone is able to have housing, a dwelling, ability to educate their children in a government school, perhaps, free meals a day, and at the end of it, perhaps some disposable income for purchase. That is already middle class in India because it is that large segment between the very thin, very rich, but very influential, and very large, very poor, and anything in between qualifies by India in the Indian context as being middle class. From the lower middle class to the upper crust of the middle class. But they're all unified by one ecosystem of aspiration, by which I mean if one generation finds a government job as a peon in a school, in a government school, for the first time in his generation or her generation, he is able to educate his children with the income which he has on a more predictable basis. Now he dreams about his children becoming far more educated and getting better jobs, doctors, engineers, merit based. I mean, and there's a very strong affirmative policy action in India. So he's already dreaming. A person with a cycle is dreaming of a scooter is dreaming of a car person is dreaming of a bigger car, a person with no dwelling unit is willing to take credit to buy a smaller home. I mean, the spiral continues, and they're all bound by the same ecosystem. So this is a large segment, and it is a very large market. A large market because don't forget rural India. Watches, wristwatch, fan, cycle, motorcycle, uh, consumable uh, items like soap, shampoo. I mean, the whole lot. It's a very huge market now. And obviously, that's an attraction both for foreign investors, but the middle class has one very important negative point: the lack of skilling. We are not producing people from the middle class who are sufficiently well educated to be actually beneficiably employable. And as the system becomes more and more automated, the need for many new aspirants in the middle class to find a job becomes even more difficult. Companies are downsizing and are going in for reducing costs through the advantages of automation. It's happening in India all the time. People are being retrenched. There are no, even if there are jobs, there are not people who are sufficiently equipped educationally to
Right.
qualify for those jobs.
One point that people don't seem to be paying attention to is the dramatic inroads made by social media, and via that people's ability to express any kind of often completely ill-informed opinions. And I find by and large people mistake having an opinion as possessing knowledge, on things like WhatsApp and any number of platforms. With that being the case, and the fact that you pointed out skilling being so desperately low, to me it's a deadly combination. I mentioned social media because it's largely used by people in their 20s. Again, India's population of people below 26 is about 50%. These are the factors I think I'm beginning to find them deeply worrisome sitting afar. What is your take? Because you live there and you pay attention to these details.
I entirely agree with you. You see, the remarkably and exponential expansion of social media has given many members of the middle class an anonymous power to shoot off opinions or express resentments in unacceptably vitriolic ways, are often to peddle half baked information as truth, collude with the perpetuation of what is obviously a fake story. They have become cannon fodder for political parties, in short.
Right.
And one of the things social media has done is to inform everybody just a little about everything without in depth knowledge.
Absolutely.
And therefore, today, the middle class, and that was not a phenomena when I originally wrote The Great Indian Middle Class, is at one level highly empowered on their mobile. They have access to YouTube, and many of them can watch things. In fact, you'll be surprised at how many people are freelancing at district level, making films and videos, which
Yes.
they upload, which people are seeing locally. It's empowered it. While at the same time, it has, in a way, devalued its knowledge base and provided it a platform, accessible platform, to have a voice which could be highly condemnatory even if it is not backed by right knowledge. So we are therefore surrounded by a ecosystem of middle class angsts and biases and subjectivities based on this new accessible platform. And to a great extent, the middle class is being used by, in an organized manner, by political parties.
For a long time, people used to criticize, and it's a fact in this country, teenagers and people up to 20 were often clueless about the rest of the world, in fact, beyond their own immediate communities. I'm beginning to see the same trend in India. If you just take anecdotally people asking questions on the street of young Indians about even elementary things, and they are completely clueless. Eventually, all this phenomenal ignorance will add up into a serious economic challenge, don't you think?
Yes and no, because I think it's at some level all countries are somewhat insular about other cultures and other countries. I have been in the foreign service and posted abroad. Even a country with whom we have the umbilical cord of being our former colonial master knows so little about it. Ask an average person. Still the land of snake charmers and
Right.
elephants and so on and so forth. They don't know. And perhaps in America, it's even worse. I mean, the knowledge of the outside world. But that hasn't prevented America from becoming an economic superpower, nor has it prevented, for instance, China from coming up. So I think that it's a phase. And it will happen in any country where the dissemination of information becomes much wider than in the past, where people get wrapped up in what they are prioritize in the immediate or urgently related to themselves and ignore the larger reality outside. And that is happening to our middle class also, but it's again not something new. Uh, Earlier, the Indian middle class, especially the anglicized Indian middle class, knew a lot about Western culture. They had read Shakespeare, but they had never read Kalidas. They knew nothing about
Absolutely.
Indian culture. They didn't even know the language, their mother tongues. The
True.
ability to speak in English in the right accent and with the right fluency was a passport to success. So, these things keep changing. Today, it's not. The largest selling papers in India are not papers in English now. I write for instance, a fortnightly column for one of them. I write 10 columns a month. But one of them is, for instance, Dainik Bhaskar.
Yeah.
It has a, I think, a circulation of uh, 65 million a day or some such thing. I mean,
Yeah.
the multiple addition.
Right. Right.
What I'm what I'm trying to say is that the middle class generally has prioritized what is of its immediate interest. So you have people coming out of IITs who know their subject but are not innovative, whose canvas of knowledge of things other than their curriculum is highly limited, and who are thus best suited to become cogs in somebody else's
Right.
wheel rather than to invent the wheel themselves.
Uh, to conclude, Pawan, if you were to write the same book today, I know you revisited it some time ago, but if you were to write it today, say post 2024, what do you think will be your immediate focus? Is there something that troubles you or excites you?
I would write for the middle class, given all the circumstances and analyzing, to work for a saner India, in India without extreme polarizations,
Right.
an India without disharmony, an India which is not what it has become today, one of the most economic unequal nations in the world, where 10% of the population controls 77% of its wealth.
Right.
And billionaires have grown in the last 2 years, and a few startups have become unicorns. But in the same period, the income of the lowest, poorest has grown by hardly 1%. So, a saner India, a more just India, a more equitable India, a more balanced India, a more united India, and a more successful India.